So, thanks everyone for being here. My name is Kevin Orton. I'm the budget manager for the city. I've just started in July, so some of you I wasn't here last year, so. Before we get started, I think we'll do some introductions, if that's all right, so we all kind of know who everyone is, and then we'll go through the agenda. But thank you everyone for spending your Wednesday night with us and for all your work that you did last year and also the work you'll be doing on this committee. Very appreciative of your time and the attention that. So, Brett, do you want to?
Sure. My name is Brent Sutherland. I'm the Director of Public Works and Utilities. I'm the director for around 8 months now, I think. Before that, I was a deputy. I've been with the city for about 3 years.
I'm Adrienne Burton. I'm the manager of innovation and performance excellence, and I'm the interim finance director currently for the next 3.5 weeks.
Brendan Thompson, I'm the city engineer and I've been here 8 years.
I'm Mike Gent, deputy city manager. I work with a number of departments, including public works, and happy to say thank you for your service. Really appreciate you continue to serve in this capacity and helping us fulfill our commitment to voters.
My name is Patrick Santana. I am here as a member of the Planning Commission. Side role.
John Jones, this is my, I guess going on 3rd year to do this. You know, really enjoyed it last few years. We've had a lot of great conversation, looked at a number of things. Career-wise, I work for EchoStar, which owns Dish, Sling, and a number of other companies. My team, on Mike, we manage about $8 billion to spend per year, and we have about 2,000 suppliers. So we're looking at spend data all day, every day.
My name is Jason. I actually used to work for EchoStar. I'm on the Historic Preservation Commission.
I'm Julie Radulovich. This is kind of my 3rd year too with John, one of the permanent members.
I'm Vincent Haynes. I'm a member of the Arts and Culture Board.
I'm Matt Duff. I'm here on the from the Transportation and Mobility Board.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks again for being here, and really excited to go over this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through the agenda real quick, and then Mike is going to go over the review of the committee charter and action plan, so we know why we're here and what we're doing. And then I'll go over the financial information review and explain what's included in that, and that'll give an opportunity for anyone to ask any questions. And then after we go through that, Brent's going to give a little highlight of what's going on in the 2025 program for this year. And then after that, we'll discuss next steps. So, Mike, do you want to follow us?
So, you know, this committee the last 2 years has done just a fantastic job of asking questions and getting an understanding of how the 3A tax revenues have been spent, and also how the products are progressing, the stats products. Hello.
Hi, sorry, I'm late.
No, you're right on time, man. We just started. Do you want to introduce yourself real fast?
Sure. I'm Jake Spratt. I'm on the South Metro Housing Options.
Thanks, Jake.
Perfect.
Yeah, the last 2 years have gone really smoothly. Our goal is to duplicate that. The one big difference between this year and the years past is that Tiffany Hooten's not here. She was our finance director. After 23 years with the city, she transitioned to another organization, and you know, things you take for granted when you have someone who just keeps taking care of stuff, right? Thankfully, she wasn't a one-person team. We have lots of employees in the city that are making sure that progress continues. Our goal is to kind of keep the efficiency and effectiveness from the years past and keep everything going. I know that the council really appreciated the reports from this board last year and the year before, and we want to make sure that we give you everything you need to feel confident presenting to council again, and hopefully you'll keep that going. So voters approved the 3A sales tax. And I'm happy to read the whole thing, but I'll get to the gist of it first, but if you want me to read more, I'm happy to do it. Basically, towards the end of the ballot question, it says, the city shall annually report the progress of projects and the expenditures of revenues to the citizens with a review by a board or commission as appointed by city council. So city council has appointed you to receive this review or to review this report from the city staff on the status of 3A projects and on the expenditure of 3A funds. And specifically, for the year 2024, but really everything up until 2024, that makes sense. In the past, this board has created a actual letter to council and then presented that letter, did you guys, the chair of the board?
John and I presented last year.
Yeah, perfect. Do you guys actually call yourselves chair and co-chair or anything like that? Or you just chose to see, you were the ones to do it?
I just refer to her as the real CFO.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a group effort, so.
Yeah, it is a group effort. I love that. But it is nice to have the individual expertise each one of you bring too. So, kind of those two things in mind. So most of the preparations for what information is gonna be shared tonight is designed to give you the status of projects and the expenditures of the revenues that have come in. You can certainly ask questions beyond that and whatnot to gain information, but we want to we prepare to go those two routes. So if you ask something beyond, or for that matter, if you ask something within that we can't answer tonight, then we're going to do our best to get you that information as soon as possible and help you be informed. So the deliverable from this group is the review of staff's reports and then your opinion of that review to our council. So kind of like an audit, but we don't use that word for some reason.
I think Julia specifically called out that we're not doing an audit.
Yeah, we're just
We're
reviewing the
not doing an
information.
audit.
Yeah,
It's a
no,
review.
no.
But if you're thinking of it kind of as, through the eyes of I'm reviewing, so you're not the accountants, it is really a review, but it's not nearly as intense as an audit.
Yeah, I think we're just looking kind of to understand what the spending was for the year and making sure that it's in line with the verbiage of what it should be spent on in the ballot measure, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, and it's for you to determine how you feel about the information. So we won't tell you to like it or not like it, but we will try to make sure you have the accurate information to be able to move forward with it. So does anybody want more information on the ballot language or anything like that? Okay, great. I'll turn it back to you, Kevin.
All right, cool. So I'm gonna go over this report that we handed out now. For those of you who are on the committee, you'll notice that it looks a little different than before. And the reason for that is because we switched financial systems since the committee met last. So so what we did was the output from that is different. So we recreated a lot of the information. The other thing we wanted to do was we wanted to be very specific of only putting in for the most part, what is actually required in the report. So as part of the charter of this committee, staff is required to prepare a report by March 31st of the spending of 2024. We were able to prepare that by the deadline, March 31st, a draft of the report. We made a couple of tweaks. That's why it was sent out a little later, but that was completed on March 31st. And so what that report does is it shares all the revenue that's been generated by 3A since its inception. You'll see that on page 5. And I'll go through this page by page. The comparison of yearly revenue since fund inception, which is also on page 5. The projected sales tax revenue for the current fiscal year, which is also on page 5. And then the utilization of money generated by the sales tax for the preceding calendar year, which would be 2024. And that will include the total spending by major capital category, debt service, unallocated funds, funds to be rolled over into the next year from 24 to 25. The overhead allocated to design and construction projects, and you'll notice we've renamed it from overhead to capital project management because we wanted it to be clear what those people are doing. I left overhead here because that's what's in the charter right now. And then what the employees' positions that were allocated to 3A fund. So Again, this report fulfills those requirements for your review and was prepared by the deadline of March 30th. So as I go through this, so the first page is on the spending by major categories, and what you'll notice is the next page, it gets into more detail. So what I'll do is just review real quick the high level, and then when we get to the next page, I will turn it over to the committee if you have any questions of any of these projects. We weren't gonna go through them one by one, but we wanted to give time that we can review them, and then Public Works is here to answer any questions on the details of those. So for 2024 in personnel, the city spent about $1 million on personnel. At the back of the sheet, you'll see the number of personnel that were allocated to 3A, which is 8.75%. In transportation and bridges, the city expensed $700,000. For payment management, it was about 3.4 million. For Safer Streets Littleton, it was 800,000. Now, Safer Streets had personnel included in that, and if you include the Safer Streets personnel, it was 1.1 million. The reason we separated it is because we wanted to keep all the personnel in the same category, but we wanted to keep track of Safer Streets because that is a $2.8 million allocation by council that includes personnel. So we want to make sure that both numbers were in there. Conservation and grounds was about 200,000, public safety about 16,000. The internal services capital, this is a transfer from this fund into our IT fund and fleet replacement fund, and that was 1.3 million. Facilities capital maintenance was 800,000, building construction upgrades 200,000. No direct expenses to environmental sustainability, 250,000 for project downtown, and 0 for the public works campus. A note on those two projects, we are City Council is currently discussing using certificates of participation for those projects. So you'll notice that those expenses are pretty low because it's mostly preliminary work and but the larger expenses, council right now is deliberating on debt options for that. And so for total spend in 2024, it was $8.8 million capital. So the next few pages give details project by project of what was actually spent on this page. And so I think what we'll do is I'll just start with the first category and allow the committee to read through. And if you have any questions on any of these projects, or I can read through them one by one. Those are projects. I was not sure what's easier for preference.
I think with this personnel one, that kind of corresponds with those FTEs you have in the back, right?
Yeah.
And my understanding is you have people that are working on the project, capital projects, they're recording their time to it, so that's kind of supporting a lot of these actuals, right?
Yeah, we have an allocation that we set up and we monitor it closely and we'll adjust those allocations as the year goes on.
And is that just kind of estimations at first and then revisions based on what people are doing?
It's more or less, yeah. We don't have people recording time directly. But what we'll do is Public Works will review, most of them are public work, actually, I think are they all public works positions?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
I think they all
are actually, yeah.
Yeah, and so we review regularly, probably about 2 or 3 times a year. So during this time, right now, we're getting ready for the budget development for 2026. So we're gonna look at those positions and have a conversation of, okay, who's actually working in 3A and make adjustments in the middle of the year. And then at the end of the year when we do our final projection, we'll do the same thing. And then when we prepare this report, we look at it again. So we actually did have a conversation on those positions for 2024. And actually Brett and I had a conversation on it just before this and about making changes in 2025.
When you, just from my knowledge, when you guys are working on a project that might have 2 or 3 different funding streams, a part of it might be funded through 3A, part of it might be some type of federal and then other. Do you guys kind of allocate amongst those funding streams, or is 3A gonna be getting most of the salary, you guys think?
We don't allocate by project, so when we look at a project for personnel, we're not looking at okay, they're spending 25% on here, it's more allocating generally, so we'll have positions, most positions. It's allocated generally, so we'll say, if they are, if we look at it about once a year saying, okay, this person is working more on 3A projects, or they're working more on capital project funding. It's not necessarily project by project allocation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Like, we have the mineral mobility project, mineral mobility improvement project right now, that has funding from Arapahoe County, from Denver Regional Council of Governments, from CDOT, and then of course from us, 3A. And so the employees that are working on that project are out of 3A, so they're not being charged to the other 3 agencies. But certainly, the whole project cost is what the project cost is.
Yeah.
But yeah, 3A would be the one that where, because at the beginning of the year, we charge those salaries to 3A.
Yeah, I guess what I want to be careful about is, I know there's been in the past some sensitivity. People, I think, want to see bricks and mortar.
Yeah.
And we all know that there's people that go behind the planning of everything.
Right.
So I guess I just want to make sure that we're all comfortable with whatever that is. I just don't want 3A to be kind of like, hey, this is kind of the catch-all for a lot of the salaries and, because I know there's limitations on some of the federal and state
Yeah,
funds,
no,
but.
that's a good sensitivity. I think that's important for us to remember.
So I guess, so let me make sure, let me repeat this back to make sure I understand. So what you guys kind of do with Public Works is you say, hey, here's kind of what different projects people are working on. So you got your capital projects, which could be, all federal or state or whatever, 3A. So you're kind of taking just a study, doing a study of time and allocating it. So what you're saying is we're not probably waiting a lot of time towards 3A, but trying to keep things respective of where people are spending their time.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, we're very sensitive to the 3A,
okay,
making sure we're not too much.
okay.
We feel this is pretty conservative. There are a lot of staff that are funded by the general fund, for example, that do work on capital projects that are construction of which is funded by 3A,
Yep.
but those people are not being charged to 3A. So feels conservative.
Myself and Kevin and Adrian are not being charged to 3A.
Yeah, you guys are overhead.
So Adrian leads the project downtown, she's all general.
Okay, gotcha, okay.
Is the percent that they show in here what you typically expect in terms of personnel relative to total?
It's hard to tell because I think there's so much planning. I guess from my perspective, I think we're still doing a lot of planning on a lot of projects, right? And then also management of projects. So I don't know if we can say, hey, I would expect it to be, a specific percent. What I'm hoping is that as some of these projects really take momentum, that we're gonna see a lot more of these I'll call it hard costs of actual construction go up. So that's why, like, when I'm looking at 8.8 million of spending and $1 million of that is personnel,
That's 12%.
we're gonna get questions about, are we just funding positions? Are we funding projects? And I know we're concerned about, yes, I know, like you had said, we didn't have a lot of shovel ready when this got passed, but I think the expectation is we were hoping to see more stuff. So I'm just trying to be sensitive of the communication out to the community of, here's what, we've got 35 million of funds that we've raised, over the past 3 years, and we've spent 14 million of those, right? So that's why I like looking at that strategic plan to understand, and I know we'll touch base on it of like, we're getting ready to spend the funds, like, we're getting ready to spend some of the funds on the public works in downtown Denver, which are huge, so that's just kind of what I'm trying to.
If I may, there's also, if you recall, this came up in the last meeting, I think last year.
Yeah.
If you think of it as, to me, 12% is quite conservative on a project. That's
Yeah,
like, in other words, I bring any citizen in front of me and I think I can argue.
Yeah.
12% is a completely conservative amount to be paying to personnel for any project. But I think you're doing the right thing.
yeah. I think,
Arguing, make sure that we're pure, but I
Yeah.
think think it's a,
It's
it's a home run.
Yeah, it's like you have a little bug in Kevin's office, cause this is, Kevin's like giddy over there going, yes, I love that she's talking about this. It's something he's given a lot of thought to. And actually has a plan that is a little bit different from how we treated it in the years past that he wants to talk about.
Yeah, and I just, you know, I know that things take time to see projects get off the ground. You know, I get questions about like, why aren't we, right? And so we're now sitting through, we've gone through another year and it's like, you know, so that's why I'm looking forward to hearing more about, you know, some of these projects. You know, I'd heard that there was gonna be potential bonds on, you know, potentially against this, but
Cool.
so, yeah, I'm not too concerned. I just wanna make sure if we're getting questions, you know, like, are we just slamming people's time here just to spend it, right? Which I don't think is the case, but at the same time, knowing too that this time is going towards planning for projects so that there is the lead time, and I don't know what the lead time is with a lot of public projects. I know it's probably not easy. Like you call somebody in 2 weeks, they're, you know, paving the whole city, but I just kind of want to, for me, kind of understand where we're at with the process of some of these projects as we're going through some of the data, so.
I agree with that, and also I don't think the numerator, the denominator should be $8 million, because some of these expenses are just equipment expenses. There's $1.5 million in vehicles and equipment that doesn't require a staff. So, when we evaluate that number, which I think is important that we do, I don't think the denominator is over 8.8. I think the denominator is over something closer to 6.
No, that's a good point.
So we had thought about that exact thing because of these projects where, because to your point, some of these are in the planning process, so we're not expending it yet, or we have staff working on a project that's not even gonna start till 2027. So what we actually did on this percentage is we changed the denominator. So what we've done in the past is we've done a denominator on expenses, and we decided to change, we are proposing, we wanted to get the committee's feedback on this, of changing it to the revenue instead of the expense, because the revenue is more consistent year over year, and it's easier to control, and it really is a reflection of.
It's interesting, yeah.
The program. So the program, we take in about 12.7, we're estimating 12.5 million this year because a little less because of interest, and also our sales tax is pretty flat right now. And so we thought it would be more consistent and better to plan if we look at the revenue and saying, we get about 12 million in revenue. We want to keep that capital management at a certain percentage. And so as our revenue increases or decreases, that's gonna affect the program. And so as the revenue increases, decreases, we can then plan to say, okay, we're now projecting, let's say we get I guess Costco is out of the back. Costco, I forget. For a long time, I was like, you're not supposed to talk about them, okay. So Costco, we're not expecting like a lot of revenue from that, but a project like that where you get tons of sales tax, well, that means there's more money available in this fund. And so then we wanna be able to plan, okay, we know we're gonna get this big project in, let's try and staff up, but what does that percentage look like? It's a little difficult when you're looking at expenses because you'll notice in 2025, we're kind of getting ahead here. We're appropriating a lot of money, but we're not gonna spend that much money. We're gonna carry a lot of that over to the next year because we wanna lock that money in for contracts. So you're gonna see expenses kind of go up and down in a pay-as-you-go program just like this. And so revenue though will be more consistent and it's easier to plan for. So we wanted to get feedback on that, and that's what the percentages are showing now is based off of the total revenue that we're planning. So I'm glad you brought that up. I was gonna save that to the end.
Sorry, I ruined the surprise.
No, it's great.
So the 11.7% on page 5 at the bottom. That's 11% of the $26 million revenue figure.
The 12.5, so the revenue is up top,
12.5, so it's 11% of that year's revenue.
yeah.
And those previous years are also against the revenue as well.
I'm just gonna weigh in here that, I mean, do you have a target for things like what percentage? The statutory document doesn't give us a target for overhead costs or staff expenses. We could in theory spend all of it, in theory, on staff. is there a target you guys are keeping internally? I mean, I think 11%, I mean, if you look at a foundation grant from a nonprofit, sometimes they 10% would be the maximum allowable overhead on the grant. So there's different entities have different numbers. We're at close to 12. Is there a number I agree with Julie that we don't want to see the use of it for staff or overhead to reach 15, 20. When it becomes 25 or 30%, people are really going to be wondering what we're doing. So is there a number you're in your head that since it's not in the statute, that you're kind of guiding where the limits of this are?
So more important than a number in our heads is there a number in the council's head, right? Because they're the ones that approve the budgets. And so this last year during budget discussions, Kevin presented to them different options and council did approve adding additional FTEs under 3A because they liked where it was at and they felt comfortable where it was at. The number that correct me if I'm wrong, Adrian, or any of you that are here, they were talking about like less than 15%, if my memory serves correctly.
Yeah.
I went back and looked at that presentation and that was what they were talking about. The conversation has always been 10%, but when we passed those new FTEs in 2024, it was 14.7 and they were comfortable.
They approved each individual one. So they very much were in the details of it and they felt comfortable with it.
They're not looking at it like we're looking at it. They don't
Well,
have
they're not looking like you're looking at it, but we can't add someone against 3A without their permission. They have to authorize that.
Is your sense of the hires, that these are gonna be ongoing positions relatively in perpetuity, or do you, when big projects are over, do we let? In other words, are these gonna be added in each year? If we had 2 more FTEs, clearing all the existing FTEs for the year. And again, if the revenue is flat in 2026, 2027, each FTE we've added in each of these years just begins to relative to the spending on the project.
So we planned all these positions in the models to continue on and to get the same increases as any other position. And just like any other position in the city, if revenue goes flat, they have to make a statement like what we're gonna do. Keep these services as well as
I think the harder question to answer, if I had imaginary citizen asking me what is people, what the overhead is, what are they doing? What I don't like about this packet versus last year is there's no forward-looking statement in terms of projects. If you're working on something like Quad Road or even simple improvements on Broadway, there's a lot of planning and engineering that goes into that. It's hard to look at this and say, well, they're laying the groundwork for something that's going to come to fruition in 2026. And I know you guys have some big stuff on the horizon, and I'm sure that's the majority of what this is doing, but it's hard to tie the two together if you don't see the forecasted capital plans.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's helpful, and I think maybe, I really like the FTE thing, and maybe if as we're talking about kind of projects and placing kindergarten down, okay, this would be kind of an area where grounds is really covering, or, I'm not savvy with who does what in the city, so you're gonna have to kindergarten it for me, if you don't mind. Safer streets, pretty obvious probably, but yeah, I think that just helps us, I think, for me, understanding the planning of it, so.
Yeah, and your points are well taken. A lot of these major projects, to take the Quad Road, for example, has been in design for over 4 years. It started before 3A was even passed. So it takes a long time on these large projects to ramp up and design and get to the construction phase. So there's a lot of work that goes in.
I think it would be helpful to not be married to them, but to have, and I think we had a piece of this last year and last year's report. These are the anticipated expenditures, these big projects, the DPW campus, the Quad Road, these things that are gigantic multi-year efforts. To be able to tie some of these FTEs to some of those projects, I think would be a lot more helpful, because I think that's a harder question to answer to the imaginary citizen is, well, what are they doing? I'd feel very comfortable saying, yeah, they're engineering an insane, new road improvement with CDOT, Dr. Cog, and private landowners and toll and Evergreen, and like that's a very RTD, extremely complicated. And that's every day of their life is dealing with that hornet's nest. But it's in the four corners of these pages, I think it's hard to answer that question.
I'll just add, our CIP budget for this year is $60 million. And I don't know what percentage of 3A funds are allocated towards that. But we are trending up every year on spending. So the thing I'm thinking about is pavement management. If you have roughly $5 million that's allocated for 2025, and then we continue to build the program to like 8.7 next year, we kind of hold that 8 million for pavement management through 2029. And so that's kind of our, I guess it's a 10-year plan, right? That's for pavement management, but the trend is to try to keep pavement management at about 8 million, I think.
That's, yeah, because that's what people are seeing, like the
Right.
streets, yeah.
We said, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say that on page 5, Kevin did list out what's appropriated in the budget for 3A, it's $26 million. We don't expect to spend $26 million a year because some of it's multi-year projects. And you have to have the money appropriated to be able to award the contract. We could give estimates on what we think we're gonna spend in 2025, but it's hard to hold us to that, if that makes sense. It's much easier looking in the rearview mirror what we actually spent than it is to say how much will get spent this year. But $26 million in 3A funds are appropriated for 2025.
When we get heavy rain and it washes out on the east side and things like that. Yeah.
It comes out of the storm sewer.
So actually, different pot of money, yeah.
Yeah.
But you're right, there's emergent funds that do come out, regardless, the new crosswalk on Littleton Boulevard, right?
Yeah.
The things that do come, kind of unplanned throughout the year, but the big thing is we can't spend the money fast enough because of the nature of how long a project is. So like on the Mineral Santa Fe improvements or the Quad Road project, we'll make payments throughout, but I mean, only so much is gonna be accomplished in 2025. And then a whole nother chunk's gonna be accomplished in 2026, and there's still gonna be work accomplished in 2027.
Yeah, and I think personnel is bad for personnel's sake. Last year in this meeting, we said like, how come you collected 14 million and 12 million only spent 5? And the answer was, we had to ramp up. We don't have staff. So we can't get this stuff through design. And I think the feedback was, well, get staff.
Get staff.
Yeah. So
Do stuff with people, yeah.
yeah, so it's not, I don't, from my perspective, personnel isn't a problem in and of itself per se. It's, well, can you tie it to this big project? Everybody reasonable understands that a lot of these things are multi-year. They're big capital commitments over time and being responsible by building a bit of a war chest, knowing that they're on the horizon. I think it's just important, especially for our role, to be able to tie those two things together.
I had a question.
Say, it's taken us a while to staff up too. I feel like 2024 was a good year for us to actually get more project managers, more people within the traffic division to kind of push these projects forward. Always feel like we need more staff, but I feel like we've staffed up to try to push through these 3A projects.
And we have the first iteration of our capital improvement plan too. So making that stronger connection, that's much more helpful, just a stronger tool for us.
To Jake's point, and I agree with you there, would it be possible to just have this committee get some kind of project list for things like line item page 5, the allocation, and since this is allocations coming out of 3A money, I assume this is tracked, so we would be able to know which projects $10 million are going into, just so that we know what that means when people ask us, and then there's pavement management. Brent, you mentioned there's 5 million, about close to 5 million in. What are the project pavement management plans for? Break those out, the big ticket thing.
Like on page 2 and 3, it has projects listed, but would you want to see the appropriations for each project? The 2025 appropriations for it, you can get a glimpse of that?
Well, page 2 under transportation and bridges, it's 700,000.
This is backwards facing for this page, right?
Because that's what you're reviewing.
I'm saying, since we
Would
know.
it be helpful to look forward?
Yeah, that's what he's talking about, this sort of where that 10 million is headed, so we can tie it together. I mean, it doesn't have to be really extensive, it should just be the base.
Well, the other reason I think it's important, and we made this point last year as a committee, is like, well, part of the oversight is to make sure that you're spending it on the correct things, but also that you're spending it. And there's this building war chest, and again, I think you have a good answer to that question. Which is, yeah, actually, these huge projects, right? So I don't think that we should be in the business of allocation.
Would you like to see the appropriations for each project? Would that be helpful for you though?
So I think it's more of like, part of the reason we didn't spend, we added $7 million to reserves is because we anticipate this thing in 2026.
Yeah.
And it's not so that we can weigh in on the appropriations piece and say we should be spending it on X and so.
Right. It's just so you know that it's being spent.
Yeah.
So, do you know off the top of your head how much is gonna go towards Mineral Santa Fe this year?
Probably around 3 million.
You know how much is gonna go in 2026?
Most will be grant funding, so over the course of the next 2 years, it's probably about $4 million worth
Yeah.
out of 3A.
And sure, you have staff that are spending all of their time on that project, and that allows us to tie it together and allows us to see like, oh, you're warehousing a little bit of money, so that when.
We're looking at the 5-year plan, we're not looking at discretely year to year.
Yes, which is good capital management. I think it's just harder, it makes it a little bit harder for us to do our job from an oversight standpoint. We don't have that. I think it's it's easy to answer the question. You guys have answers. Because we all know collectively, these things are on the rise.
We are working on an internal initiative for a project management platform internally, so we'll be kicking that back off in a few weeks. It's PMIS, so it's Project Management Information System, but it's for our project managers to have a consistent project management platform, so they're tracking all of their project information, and we can have a real-time database that we can pull all of this information. So we can get much more up-to-date information about all of the project data that you would want to see in terms of.
So next year, these dashboards and easy access, you'll be able to see a lot of that, which unfortunately isn't as visible right now. That's Smart Sheets, if you're familiar with project management. It will be, it'll be internal and, basically, the components of it, yeah.
So what I'm hearing then is we can provide, so we're taking, so the 2025 number of 26.1 million of appropriations, that is gonna be the revised budget that we're getting posted today. So on May 20th, the council will pass that second reading, but we can provide a by project list for that. That's pretty simple for us to do. So we can send that out to the committee for everyone to review. It's not, and the reason it's not part of the packet is because we really wanted to keep the packet pretty bare bones to what, I keep using the word bare bones, but we wanted to be very specific of what was requested in the charter. So that way, we know moving forward what the committee is looking for, and so. But we can do that, we can provide that, that's pretty easy. Once we get out to those further years, it's more, some of it's more planning, because we might be able to highlight some of the bigger projects, but every year we're shifting those out. We're shifting that around based on priorities when we get to those out years, so.
Yeah, and we're not forward facing, in the sense of, well, you said it was gonna cost 25 and it cost 35, what happened? I think it's more of the magnitude to say, oh, you have a $10 million project coming up in 3 years. You're staffing to plan that project, or you're building reserves for that project. Whether that ends up being an 8 million or 10, that's the council, you guys have. I think that rough order of magnitude to see, well, this is where this team is heading, this is where their efforts are going. So,
So if you look back at like our first year, different position, different person in Brent's position, and I think he brings tremendous amount of expertise and just the way he conveys what's going on with projects, and it's very facts-based. Point really quick. I'd like to, maybe if we could shift gears a little bit and just hear from him, what's the last year look like in the absence, of all the details regarding every project. Could you just give us like an overview of how things are going, anything we might want to know?
As far as spending 3A money the last.
Yeah.
I would say we're trending up, and even if you look at page 5, you can see that in 2023, we really only spent $5 million of 3A funds, right? And then 2024, we spent 8.8 million. I think you're just gonna continue to see that trend going up. I mean, we've got a lot of big projects coming up. Building 2 and 3 as part of the service center, that, I don't know how much 3A money that's gonna be, but it's probably more debt. It's probably a $40 million project to build those 2 buildings. More discussions on what happens with Project Downtown. I don't know if that will be 3A, but it'll probably be another debt discussion. How much we spend on that. I know pavement management is trending up, and we're trying to hold about 8 million. And we feel like, our 10-year plan, that'll kind of get us caught up. And I guess, Brent, am I missing something as far as the trends and the projects?
I think 2025 and 26 will be the peak of what we're seeing right now. We've had a lot of grant funded projects that we've been designing and are now coming to construction. So 25 and 26 are going to be a large ticket year, and then going in the out years, I think it's going to be more of a stable level. Predicated on grants or additional revenues, but I think we're at a peak right now.
And I do have maybe I can share my screen. We recently gave a presentation to council on just CIP things that are going on, and we have a kind of a trend line for what the future looks like. Slide it. I haven't joined the meeting. Maybe that's part of
Well,
the
you
problem.
can just go in the window. Share that Zoom.us.
Was there getting that going, like from an engineering point of view? Do you guys feel like you're executing against what you're planning to do? How are things going overall, from your point of view?
I think we are executing as we anticipated. There certainly have been some unanticipated delays in reviews from external agencies. We thought some of the projects that are now going to be constructed in 25 would have started in 24, but delays in reviews that we didn't anticipate. But beyond that, I think we're executing at a pretty high level.
What about the staff that you have today? Do you have the right people?
I think we do. Very competent and capable.
Another question, as it pertains to transportation is, we've been chatting about how Littleton doesn't really have sidewalks. And that was estimated to be like an $80 million project years before the pandemic. So now probably 110 million, I don't know if that's 3A specifically, but also with the Safe Streets projects that are coming. That there's some expenditures there. We don't know if we can always rely on grants. I think staff has been incredible at going and getting grant money, for projects like this. But I saw a thing saying that for instance, no multimodal projects are gonna be funded with federal dollars. I saw that yesterday. So, that there's, that I wonder where that money's coming from, is what I'm saying.
I think those are going to be some challenging conversations with council and the community going forward. This 5-year capital improvement plan we adopted last year, $150 million worth of unfunded needs. Those are the needs that we know of today that have no identified funding source.
Yeah.
And we're looking at construction cost 8% year over year right now. I mean, it's huge.
In the wrong business.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this is one of the slides that we shared with city council a couple of weeks ago. So, I mean, you can see that our capital investment trend, and And the pavement managed one, that's the lower black line at the bottom there. And so that's, you know, that's basically showing between 2019 and 21, we spent about $2 million a year on pavement management. And our trend for the next, 7 years, is closer to that 6 million. But total projects, this year, we're high, we're looking at $60 million worth of projects. And our trend is basically 40 million, for the next several years. So there's a lot coming up, I think, is kind of the point of this slide. And we are starting to ramp up. You can see when we passed 3A in 2020, it took us a while to ramp up, and we spent a little more money in 2022. We spent a lot of money in 2023, but I think the trend is positive for investing in capital.
We have the new developments that are going in, especially Santa Fe and Mineral. That will increase the city's, a road is a liability, for the city. And so our liabilities are increasing, the more streets we create. And I'm skeptical that, that the tax that we're gonna get from those places, hopefully the economic activity, makes up for that. But I don't know,
In general, it's like 80% of what you need in city services that you pay for in your property tax. Well, not in property tax, but in the taxes that generate from you, sales tax, property tax, everything from a unit of housing. And so you're right. There is a gap there. How do you fill that gap? With business activity? Absolutely. Draw in customers from outside the city and whatnot.
as an example, that Mineral and Santa Fe project, it's pretty sparse in terms of commercial activity. It's mostly housing, is that correct? There's 3 or 4 pads of,
There is there's different components of the project, and the commercial hasn't started yet. There will be commercial activity there, but to your point, yeah, well, it might offset right there. That's probably fair. Once it's fully built out. Kind of hard to look at, with just those units, but it might pencil out that way. Because it's gonna draw people from other areas of those commercial as well.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, for sure.
So they asked this question in a very basic way. That line's going down. This is going up, and we have $150 million. What am I missing here?
That's just pavement management, correct?
Well, no, pavement management is the actual bottom.
That's the top line.
Yeah, the top line is the capital investment trend.
That includes storm sewer, that includes sewer,
It's everything.
sanitary, it includes facilities, yeah.
Yeah, basically includes all of our CIP.
Yeah.
Which storm.
But John, you're right, in the expenses of aging city are gonna continue to go up. And we're gonna have to prioritize which ones we're gonna, figure out, to address and what's the most pressing needs. That's one of the conversations on advancing project downtown right now, is they're saying, hey, this is really important. It was listed in the 3A bond, downtown streetscape, but how does that compare to other needs that the city has right now, and how best, so Brent mentioned that we're getting ready to do certificates of participation, a form of debt. There's only so much capacity for debt. So if we use it for this, we can't use it for this. So our council is being very thoughtful about how do we do all this? And they want to maintain flexibility because they know the priorities 5 years or 10 years from now may be different than what we're looking at now. So they want to move forward and maintain flexibility, which is a challenge, but we're all up for it. We're gonna do our best.
Yeah, and I would say from a staffing level, I feel like that $40 million is kind of the sweet spot. I think this year, we're spread too thin trying to do $60 million worth of projects. So I think that is kind of why we're planning to, that $40 million is kind of what we think our capacity is for staff.
Like, is there any issue, like when they're looking at those COPs? I didn't see anything in the language about not being able to use the 3A.
We could use 3A to pay debt.
Okay, so we don't have any limitations with that?
Not as far, so the 3A does have limitations of what the money can be used for,
Yeah.
but it can be used to pay debt on those
On those items, okay.
qualified projects.
That helps, thank you.
And with that, one of the pieces of the report is to talk about debt service paid, and right now there's no debt service being paid. But we do have the fund balance, the notice on page 5 that the unallocated fund balance is all reserved for debt service because we are basically reserving anything we have left to do for a possible future COP issuance. So that's why, and that was a decision we did as part of the budget last year, is we reserved some of that money for future COP issuance. For,
And debt has so many advantages, you know, one, it allows you to accelerate work, but two, these products that have, you know, 50 years of value, well, citizens that come 10 years from now will pay their share.
Yeah.
As opposed to the citizens who live here today, you know, paying 100% of it, everybody will pay their proportional share over the life of that debt, 20 years or whatever it ends up being.
Can I ask another kindergarten question? So, you know how you guys had mentioned earlier, we've got the budget that says, hey, we can appropriate this, and then the rollover of the funds. Is that kind of all technical of saying, hey, this is kind of, we can use it to, you know, enter into those contracts? Is that kind of more of like, we're earmarking the funds so that people don't see it? Well, we're earmarking the funds for future things that we've identified, so it doesn't sit here as really true unspent funds. Okay.
It's one of the ways, cities will do it in different ways, and one of the ways we're showing it here is by showing it by project. It's another word for it, it's a restricted fund balance.
So walk me through that, along the lines of what Julie's asking about. Under your adopted budget, that's where these allocated pieces are. But we're still gonna bring in more than, we're still gonna have this balance. I guess what I'm getting at is, it seems like we have a really large balance and doesn't look that great to certain people, which you guys are already talking about. Why wouldn't we just pull other projects over, you know, from something else?
So the reason why is because that balance is being reserved, most of that's being reserved for future debt payments. So for those bigger projects, so right now, we have it reserved waiting pending council decision on Project Downtown, Santa Fe and Mineral, Bellevue Service Center, and Town Hall Arts Center. So on page 5, that $8 million fund balance, we're marking it, all of that fund balance, when you look at our, and I can provide a preliminary 5-year plan, we made some adjustments to it. And you'll see that we have debt reserve building up in the plan. And so everything that is left over it's getting carried over into the years for those bigger projects as part of the COPs.
Kevin, do you remember how much $1 million in debt buys in project dollars?
It is about
10 million with 700,000.
Yeah, 10 million for 700,000. So we calculated, so for all those 4 projects, an estimated debt service is about 4.8 million a year. And when council last approved those numbers, it was a ramp up. And so that 8 million is all going towards that ramp up. And so once we get into those outer years, we're having discussions with council about, I don't wanna say setting a policy, but having a guideline of how much percentage of revenue should we dedicate towards 3A once we get out there. And I don't know if they were, I don't think they really, we're still talking, but what we're trying to do is set a policy so that once we start issuing that, we're reserving the fund balance so we can start that, and then we'll reserve a portion. We're looking at reserving a portion of the revenues for that debt service.
We fully expect that in your review next year, that you will have debt payments on there.
Okay, so they're gonna do this CLP too.
Yes.
Okay.
Is it a single issuance for all four of those projects?
Probably not, because we don't wanna, pay interest on stuff that we're not ready to go for. It's not only will it be not a single issue for all four projects, but it might be multiple phases even for one project.
Those COPs, the voters don't have, the citizens don't have to
It's
vote.
councilmatic, yeah.
Okay. John, I think back to your question, when you were saying allocating more projects to three A. Are you, I think one of the things we had talked about last year was you guys are trying to focus more on using up the grant funds, right, first, and then,
And this year's the big hit for us for grants. Do you happen to know the number? It's huge.
30 plus $1 million worth of grants.
stuff that's just gone away? Or you would plan for, or is
Yeah,
stuff
that
that's gone away?
it's all been in the design phase and now it's going to the construction.
Is that
phase.
30 million of the grant reflected in the $40 million of projects up there?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So we got that too, still just trying to prioritize grant funds and then,
So a lot of the 3A funds are being used towards our local match on those grant funded projects.
There's no grants for pavement maintenance, right?
No, unfortunately not.
no grants for the plan.
On the CIP, 150 million. Considered part of that.
There's some big management projects that are unfunded as well.
Is there a way to pull forward some of those paving projects? I'm wondering.
Within our 5-year plan for use of all of our capital funds, every dollar is programmed into some project. So if one project is accelerated, another project has to be set aside.
I'm just wondering, my assumption would be, it would be easier to do paving projects versus some of these other projects that are more, have a lot more planning ahead of them. As a way of like, as you're having that ebb and flow of the planning and when things kick off, filling in with more.
But once we make a promise that we're gonna, use that money towards a project, then we can't use it towards another project. So
If you can't change appropriations.
what the commitment we have to the mineral and Santa Fe project.
Yeah.
I don't know, how does that work from a timing point of view? So the money, what's our total commitment right now on that?
25 million,
And what's our portion of the 25 million?
about 5.
Yeah, and so, yeah, and so can you use that, $5 million on something else in the meantime?
In the meantime, but as soon as we need to execute a construction contract, those funds have to be there.
So
Yeah.
depending on where you're at in the timing.
Yeah, cause that's a big commitment thing. I guess I'm thinking more of, as we're moving forward and we're seeing some things changing in the grant environment, right? Of projects that maybe we have to put on hold because we might not have grant funding potentially, a little more longer term. Could we say, hey, we were gonna commit 4 million towards that, and hey, we know it's probably not gonna happen for another couple of years. Can we take that and redeploy it temporarily, do paving now and then take next year's and put more, knowing that there's this ebb and flow, right? That's, I know if we have to match, and we've gotta have that, and, there's no messing around with that, but.
We can use pavement maintenance as a little bit of an ebb and flow,
Okay.
but poor Brent is mostly an ebb, not a flow.
Yes.
He needs no more Shabazz, whatever. Okay, yeah.
Like, I have sorry, were you finished?
Yeah, I'm done, yeah.
So one of my questions is, these are large numbers and they rely on very healthy economic activity. And we would love to be able to predict the future, but we can't. And so is there do we have a buffer of if we're gonna have 6 million of debt payments a year, do we have a buffer of we're building up every year of reserves just in case, revenues go down, is the question of that.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Right now, we're more focused on kind of getting it started. I imagine that once we get it issued and we want to get enough cash to get us through the first few years, and then once we know how much we're gonna issue, we will probably look at that so that we do build a reserve, to make sure we have enough funding. Once we issue debt, then we're looking at the waterfall cascade of funding where debt goes first, or like personnel goes, we have those commitments. And Since we haven't issued it yet, we haven't really had those discussions, but definitely, once you start issuing debt, we'll have to have that discussion to make sure we have enough money. I mean, I'm not gonna predict we'll ever lose half of our revenue, but I think one thing I found going through COVID, from where I came from before, and I'm sure everyone at this table is, everyone learned how to be pretty creative when the faucet starts running low, so, but that'll be a conversation we'll have once we don't really have good solid numbers yet on the debt service, until we actually go out and issue.
So your underwriter's gonna require you to capitalize some reserve funds anyway. At least 12 months reserve funds, you have to replenish, but that gives you time to reallocate.
Are there concerns if they enter into this debt fairly, here in the near future, are we gonna be sitting on cash funds that if we've collected these funds, right, 3A, and we're it's taken some time to get the spending done, are we gonna have the same cash flow issue of, hey, let's say we enter into 50 million of COPs, we get 50 million, are we gonna be sitting on that until we can start getting stuff rolling, or do we have things to a point where we're ready to kick off and we really just need those big chunks of the funding to execute?
Yeah, since those are more towards discrete projects, that we would issue that debt based on project readiness. And so for certain projects like the service center, we would be working through a basis of design first and getting to that point where we've established all of the project parameters before we'd even get to that discussion around when and how we're going to issue that debt. So we have a good sense of schedule, project readiness, all of that. And then we would get more into detailed conversations around that. And so then we're going into RFP for design, but again, we're working around a discrete project. And so, yes, we're not necessarily waiting. We don't have 15 different discrete projects that we're working towards. And so that's 3 projects versus a whole program.
Yeah, I think that'd be interesting to kind of see where those lay out in the future and dollar amounts, just of like, hey, to see the big
Yeah.
wave coming or whatever it is,
And the unknown for us is our facilities portfolio right now. We're undergoing a facilities condition assessment right now, and that will go to council later this summer in August. And I'll be talking about the average age of our facilities, roughly 300,000 square feet of facilities in our portfolio is 60 years. And that they haven't seen significant investment in that time. And so you can imagine they're in great shape. And so that's where we'll need that flexibility when we're thinking about capital, COPs, all of those different alternative funding mechanisms.
How much, and I haven't been really paying too much attention to the capital projects for the past year, but how much information has been provided out there on the website or to the public of here's kind of future projects, like the CIP plans of like the 5-year? I know it's the council is reprioritizing stuff and things are shifting. Is there anything out there to look at for the public that we could direct them to that says, hey, here's kind of, we're sitting on this, but we've got.
The draft CIP or not draft, the first CIP, yeah, that is posted on, we have it on the finance report, so where the budget pages are, or where the budget document it lives. I know
Yeah, it's not a marketing document though. It's a finance document.
Yes, it's buried in the bowels of accounting land, yeah. Yeah.
And we're working on several different initiatives that will help just provide more information for the public so they have a lot better sense of what's going on currently, what's upcoming. We have a lot of information in disparate locations on our website. We have a great new communications and marketing director that's working with our public works team to develop some interim solutions right now, but we're working on consolidating our resources and having something that's much more user-friendly and people have, that real-time data and they understand what's happening on my street, what's happening over here on the neighbor's street. And
yeah, I've used that on the website to see kind of what the projects are.
Yeah.
And the Littleton report has been nice. And then also the, I think the email too, but
So in looking at enhancing those things and just making them a little more comprehensive, and so you can see all things, not just capital, but special events, planning things as well.
Yeah, I just think it's for the average citizen who may not be as involved in the city, in the know of what's going on, I think they look at is, you know, do I have crappy streets or not, right? I mean, that's the first thing I think people look at, so.
And that's easy to see.
Yeah, it's it, unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about some of the specifics that we're working on here? On internal services capital, give a little more color on the technology equipment in the city. Where do those dollars go?
Yeah, so those go to our, so the city, 2 or 3 years ago, established what's known as an internal service fund, which is essentially a separate fund in the city where the city departments are the customer. And so the reason cities will establish these so that there's a dedicated source of funding for replacement of fiber, for example, for IT, there's fiber optics, there's different IT equipment, and for the city fleet, replacement of vehicles. And so what this does is it transfers to those funds to help seed those projects, because historically, our fleet replacement has been our vehicle. I'll let you explain the fleet. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna try to find that too, so.
Yeah.
I think we have 350 pieces of equipment that our fleet maintains, and that includes, like, you know, everything from the police to the snow plows to weed eaters and, you know, blowers and all that kind of stuff. And the average age of our fleet, I think, is 11 years old. And normally you would replace your vehicles every 10 years or every 100,000 miles. So we're way behind on the replacement of our fleet in general. In fact, we have a dump truck that's 37 years old. And I don't know why we have a dump truck that's 37 years old. We just have not dedicated the resources to get onto like a continual replacement for our fleet. And so we need to start spending some money in that area also.
Has it worked for 37 years?
I think it's worked, but you know, the maintenance gets more and more the older it gets. And, you know, do we really need to keep that around and spend the maintenance on it, or would it be cheaper to get rid of it and then when you need a dump truck, go rent one?
Yeah.
Right, as opposed to just having it hang around, you know, and maintain it.
Yeah, there's also the dynamic of, you know, washing machine or refrigerator used to last for 20 years, now they last for 5, and they're built to break, you know, kind of thing.
Exactly.
So like, you know, it doesn't.
But they're much more energy efficient.
They are, yeah.
But your point is still totally valid.
Yeah, like, I don't know if, I like, from my perspective, I don't know that we should try to replacing every 10 years. We should replace it when it's cost effective to replace it, you know? But I assume that you all are doing that as well, but just.
Well, and actually, we have a new fleet manager and he's actually came up with our first replacement schedule. We just reviewed it today. We have not shared that with the city manager's office yet, but we're working on that. We've not done that kind of planning in the past. It's been a kind of ad hoc on replacement.
Or not. I feel sorry though for the geriatric dump truck that's finally going to be euthanized. I mean, there's a public interest story in that. That's pretty cool.
Older than some staff.
I know, right?
Yeah, you should use it
That's
on.
true, that is old.
Welcome Week parade,
Yes.
like the final.
Yeah, we should have a ceremony. That would be very funny to have.
Please let that happen. That's a great idea.
Just like spray painted some bright colors, have some staff and one of the council members in there and just.
That truck is our longest tenured employee.
Yes.
Almost, actually.
Almost, yeah.
Can I ask about Safer Streets Littleton? There's $400,000 in supplies.
Turn to Public Works to talk about that.
Most of the supplies were, some of the radar counters, so we installed some radar counters and track vehicle counts and vehicle speeds. Those are some of the supplies. A lot of, you've seen a lot of pilot projects that we've been doing around town, some of the delineators and temporary striping and different things that we're trying out there. Those are some of the supplies that were purchased with those funds.
Does that get coded as supplies as opposed to street improvements or?
It does get coded as supplies, yes.
So like we can think of that as supply/equipment.
Mhm.
Okay. And then vehicles?
There were 2 additional vehicles that were purchased with that to supply the new FTEs, the 2 new FTEs that were hired as part of Safer Streets, so that they can be going out to the field and looking at these different pilot projects, doing traffic counts, all those sort of things.
That's $110,000. There's 2 of them and it's
We
220.
had a couple trucks.
And those were 110,000.
There must have been some other vehicles out of that, because those vehicles were in the 70 range.
Yeah, I think the trucks, well, we bought EV trucks. Because a lot of the our inspectors are trying to get rid of our high idle vehicles, and so we're replacing them with EVs, so, you know, just be, I guess, more, environmentally friendly, more sustainable.
They weren't $110,000.
No, they weren't.
Okay, yeah. Like those are.
In fact, we bought one with a grant this year from, well, last year, because I doubt that program's still going on, but we did buy it
Luck.
last year with federal money, so.
Is there a project or a capital plan specific to Safer Streets where some of this, it jumps out that $4,000, out of $1 million, in street improvements, and I think some of that's just semantics, how it's coded. But, similar to the earlier question, is there something that these vehicles that are out doing traffic counts, that are observing traffic, these pilots, what is that pointing toward? What's the end goal?
Yeah, there is not a plan that's been developed, but staff has actually just started that, strategic. This was an initiative that came very suddenly, and we ramped up really quickly, and it's been reactive, and now we are developing a strategic plan so that we can be proactive and sustain this program going forward, so that's in development.
It's a very sensitive topic for a lot of people. And it's great to see there's an allocation to it. I think that higher risk of somebody looking at that saying, yep, what's actually being done? And I understand completely the reactionary part of it, which is. So, here's the question in my mind of, we're buying new cars and we're, piloting projects, do we have an input? There's quite a bit of money, $1 million with personnel voted into it. See on paper, partial improvements. It feels better as well. You've got 3 or 4 potential projects that we're piloting. Either any one of those might be, a big design. We're just not committing to them yet. That answer is a little better if pilots are going to want specific improvements. So that category, I think, is most alarming to me. It's knowing that there's not so a lot of the other stuff, the personnel, I think you guys have answered really well. Like, yeah, we're staying so powerful. I've got to answer them. Big giant projects downtown and Broad Road. I think this one, I think we need some sort of direction of where that is going.
Agreed, and that is something that is definitely in the works. I'd say just similar to any other program that's brand new, there's kind of a ramp up of designing, developing, it's crawling before you run, and now I think we're at the walking stage, and then developing a strategic plan.
Do the supplies include delineators or any of that signals, the RFBs or anything like that? The supplies include any of that?
There were no new RFPs, a lot of the.
So those could be under the street improvements category, since they were actually put on the streets.
Yes,
But because they're temporary, we didn't include them
we
in
did
that.
include them in that. We were thinking of the street improvements as more the permanent improvements.
How much do you think of in that supplies and stuff that actually got installed out on streets? Do you have any idea?
All of it.
The 413,000
That was all.
stuff that's been installed.
Yep.
Yeah, so you could almost say that's street improvement.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that the delineators are interim, but they're interim. They're a bridge.
They're working,
They're
right?
a bridge
Yeah.
toward something. And I think not having the something is defined is, okay. I don't think anybody's gonna move people back. Be like, well, we're trying to do the best we can right now. And then have a permanent solution in place that makes a lot of sense. I think the personnel overhead and the vehicles are a little harder to follow when there's not a clear path to, we're piloting one of three options. We're gonna stick to that, but we've identified it.
I agree. It does seem slow, because when we presented Julie to the city council, right after us was that group that presented regarding safer streets. You know, the plan and everything. I don't know, if that probably wasn't the finalized plan or much more work after that, but so we're like 10, 11 months later. It looks on paper, we haven't really done anything.
I think part of that is there's a number of studies that are occurring right now for different corridors and things like that. I don't know how much of that is 3A versus grants versus, you know, what that is, but I think there's the corridor study, and some of them are wanting to get funded, some of them are funded, right? So maybe you could just explain some of those.
Yeah, we just kicked off a corridor study on Elati Street. We're hoping to get some grant funds for that. That hasn't come through. So that just kicked off. There was some school zone safety evaluation that was done last year, traffic calming evaluation that was done as well. I think with all capital projects, it's important to remember that they don't happen within a discrete calendar year. A lot of capital projects may start in the construction season of, you know, April, May, and they may linger into the next calendar year. So it's challenging when we look at just a discrete calendar year from a financing perspective. That's not necessarily a good reflection of how the work is proceeding.
Yeah.
And again, that's why it's nice to see a couple of years of
Right.
spreading, you know, just for people to understand that.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think I don't think anyone, especially the Elati corridor, I mean, talk about making up for sins of the past. There's no good solution there.
Challenging.
That is the answer. There's no good solution there. It's poor planning from 50 years ago to put schools in the middle of a neighborhood with no direct arterial access. That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's been patchwork over the years. It's intractable. So I don't mean to suggest that there's an obvious solution and.
We were supposed to have Jetson's vehicles by now.
Yeah, we're supposed to float. But I think that even something similar to sort of the dashboard, you have it, maybe it's out there and I just haven't seen it, but here's what we're piloting, here's what we're aiming at, here's what we're studying, running this right. I think that's a perfectly sufficient answer to say, these people are working on the best solution and they're evaluating multiple of them. I think it's a particularly sensitive topic, obviously, to folks in that community. So I think that's progress enough. You can't expect to fix that problem that is 50 years old.
I would be in the camp that I'm sensitive to it and we're way too slow here. We need to.
Yeah. Path forward. Couple of options, I think is else.
It's really, really hard, I feel like. I mean, this is probably the thing I'm most passionate about, but also they're doing the wrong thing when they did Elati the last time, you know? And so I feel like there's so much prior knowledge that we can just go grab from other places, you know, now. But it's, you know, it should be great, you know, what we put in. But yeah, progress would be good.
Well, I mean, what's your take on like where we are relative to where you think we should be given all your expertise in that space?
I don't know that I have expertise, but I have lots of interest, so, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think most people would say we would have expected something to be done by now, you know, like more meaningful things to be done by now. You know, the intersections, you know, so some of the intersections, like those traffic calming circles, you know, one of them got the temporary pilot project. One of them got the pilot project. We went and toured it, you know, as part of the Transportation Mobility Board, which is good. But, you know, there's what, 2 others, you know?
Both of them on a lottie between Ridge and Euclid have the paths around it.
Yeah, and then there's one at the top of the hill, and then there's one at Runyon as well, right by our house. Yeah, yeah. I rode through that today. Yeah, like I would say I would have hoped for and expected more to be done by now, and I understand, you know, your all's perspective of we need to get the funding, we need to get the study, we need to move at the speed of government. You know, but it's, you know, where what years now, I would say, well, you know, we had the transportation master plan project coming up, you know, a revamp of the transportation master plan, like an iterative change on it. It was established in 2019, so it's up for review because they're trying to review it every 5 years or so. So that's coming up as well. But I mean, most of the stuff in that document is saying safety is our first priority as a city, you know, and that's what we're targeting. And it has like these streets should be multimodal, you know, and then there hasn't been a ton of progress on that. And this is why the vehicles is interesting as well, because a large thing that the city has been saying for the last 2 or 3 years is we don't have plows to maintain bike paths, you know, for instance, if we put them in for kids and others, we don't have the vehicles. We still don't have the vehicle, I don't think.
You can plow bike lanes down.
Oh,
One
really?
of the expenditures in that was a V plow to go on.
Okay, fantastic.
That's cool.
Yeah, yeah, that's great to hear, yeah, yes.
Well, and you know, the sensitive event that you were referring to was, you know, 1.5 years ago, right? And to your point about the speed of government, it's relatively remarkable that we were able to evolve because, boy, I love the lens you look at the TMP through, you know, it was not a multimodal friendly TMP, man.
It was, I would describe it as like, you can't make a TMP and not say that safety is your priority.
Yes.
So like in the top level, it's like, we love safety. And then how do we make decisions? We don't care about multimodal at all.
So
That's how I would describe this.
So we went from this environment where multimodal wasn't prioritized and we were flipping a pretty big switch to say, yes, multimodal safety is a priority for the city. And so that includes staffing up, which we've done. That includes, you know, piloting, it includes contracting for some of the studies and we come in with the right projects. So I believe that while it looks frustrating right now, like how, you know, you can't see as much, I believe in hindsight, we'll look back and go, wow, it's pretty impressive how quickly the city has evolved. And it's due to incredible staff that have been working really hard on this. And so while we're in the midst of it, it's hard to see. But having spent my career in this sector, and seeing what's been accomplished in this short period of time, I'm going, pinch me, man, this is crazy. This is real. The fact that we have this much money, this much support, this much encouragement, this much appreciation, and I mean, it's not existent in most cities.
I would say when I moved back to Littleton in 2019, people were openly antagonistic to this idea is how I would describe it. So the atmosphere has dramatically changed, which has been really fantastic to see. But there's also the element that we had to have a complete and utter tragedy in order for that to happen. And I don't think that that's how it should operate, you know, that we have to have people pass away in order for us to prioritize these things and make, you know, and actually make them happen, you know.
It makes you feel better. It doesn't always work that way. We often have terrible tragedies and results.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we're very familiar with that, you know, so yeah, but you know, I think, the mindset change has been dramatic, you know, and in a positive way, I feel like now hopefully we can start to make the things start to happen. And a big concern that the Transportation Mobility Board has is the funding part of it. You know,
And
because-
thankfully, we had 3A. That's
Yes.
amazing that that was here when this switch got flipped.
Yeah, but with the grants being up in the air, you know, for a lot of these things. That's how we've been funding most things up to now, it seems like, has been grants, and so, like, you know, what percentages of 3A funds should be dedicated to these types of things as well, and I don't know that I have an answer necessarily, but in order to make the progress that we all hope to see.
Yeah, and I don't expect, overnight results. I think the city's reacted very positively. I think that's very encouraging. I think the point I'm driving at, more is you've allocated 2 FTEs at roughly $200,000, $250,000 of vehicle expense and $200,000 in professional consulting services. And I think that what from a citizen oversight standpoint, you might see is a plan. And I know it's in process, but that's quite a bit of people. That's 2 full-time staff sitting in 2 brand new cars to try to solve the problem. And like I said, it's a very sensitive topic. So I think it's something where people are gonna be like, okay, well, what is the plan? You have 2 people working on this whole time. You know, you don't have to solve it tomorrow, but like having a path forward, a clear direction, I think would be helpful.
I'd like to say that, that the way that 3A fits into these various questions, safer streets is but one of the many topics we're dealing with. But we're hearing that we have a multi-year capital improvement plan. We have a multi-year safer streets, sort of, it's not a policy-driven plan, but there are projects that are in the pipeline. We have, you know, Brent, as you mentioned, the new fleet manager has a multi-year fleet development plan. Kevin, you mentioned that you have a 5-year plan showing carryovers that are going. These are the kind of documents that all of these things relate to 3A. And it might be useful for us just to have some of those plans in the next meeting or between these 2 meetings, so that we have a sense of where these future costs that will draw 3A money are gonna go. That's just the big picture of what I hear. This conversation relates to some of the earlier stuff we've had. I mean, I'm supportive of all of these initiatives. I mean, I think, but it's good to know, as Jake is mentioning, that what we're aiming for, what's tied to these expenses now, what's gonna go. It can be a 5-year horizon, and with all the caveats that come with, we don't know exactly what will happen in the 5 years. But the fleet plan, you know, that's something it's easy to say, oh, these $200,000 trucks are really expensive, but we have an environmental action plan that says we need electrification. That's aligns with that. I mean, these are, we can say that as stewards of this 3A money, that's a meaningful movement on that particular thing. I just would like to know.
Yeah, I mean, I would say with the fleet plan, I still haven't vetted it through the.
I know it's brand new.
office, so we just met today to talk about it. That's what was on top of my mind, but.
That is tricky, like making sure we don't surprise our council with stuff. So while work is very much in draft and work product still, there are some things that we can share with you and we should share with you. And so we can work on that. And our goal would be to get it to you as soon as possible so you can, incorporate it into your letter.
People see those line items like 1 million goes to fleet, and it's just a very lump sum. I would like to know what that means, where it kind of what it is in reality. We're not doing our fleet strictly with 3A money, but 3A contributes to this kind of fleet development in the pipeline.
I think you guys have good answers to all this, like, you know, it's pretty good pushback. The fact that the vehicle's average life is 11 years old, the fact that your campus on Bellevue is
90 years old.
They're good answers. They're not in the forward document. So maybe a little more narrative, the next time we go through this, and a little more support. Or, hey, we're spending this money now on personnel because of these projects that are pipelined. Would help. In terms of the call it hard cost or brick and mortar expenses, I think it's encouraging year over year. See, particularly on the pavement management, that number's gone up quite a bit. And I think the facilities maintenance, same thing. I think last year there was some BAS upgrades, new light. So you see now that pipeline flowing. At least I think, the hard cost type, brick and mortar type expenditures, I think are trending the right way. And I have personally, zero concerns about how any of those funds were spent. I think it's more applying the stuff that is sort of inherently forward-looking to similar list of projects that are on the horizon without getting in the business of budgeting and appropriation.
Well, and with the narrative format, you could probably do that.
You certainly have like five. You got a 40-year-old dump truck.
That's not, you shouldn't put it in Western Welcome Week. Everybody's gonna see it.
It's wonderful.
So like, I know, like I was clicking through here, like when we looked at the verbiage in the ordinance about, what these projects are supposed to be used for. And I greatly appreciate the categorization. That's been very helpful. That you guys have provided, and I clicked through, each of the categories and I don't see anything per se that gives me pause for concern that these weren't spent, in accordance with 3A. So I don't see anything just from my perspective saying, hey, we can't go to city council and say these weren't spent in accordance with 3A. So I think from what we're supposed to do on a base level of the committee, I think we've got that, but, so I don't know. I guess I'd like everybody's thoughts on, is there stuff that from a base level of us saying, hey, we've reviewed this information and it sits in the categories, does anybody have any concern about anything? Because ultimately what we're gonna have is that kind of, that same memo we had last year where it says, all we have to do is say we've reviewed it and, it will look like those funds are spent within the categories and anything that is with, and then future considerations or other comments.
No, I think like, it seems like the groundwork is being laid, is what I would say, from my evaluation of this, that we're laying groundwork, we're getting employees in place, we're getting plans in place, we're getting, for lots of things like downtown, all these things, we're starting to lay that foundation. And I would say, I feel like I'm in a city that functions well. And I feel like this is the same for this, 3A accountability,
Do you have any concerns?
I mean, some of the ones that you've already addressed, I had some of the same concerns with regard to the safer streets, just because I was concerned with the dollar amount. But it really was explained. I don't think I've made any concerns.
No concerns, and I love the idea of maybe next, although it'll be a much longer meeting, having a, deeper trees of information about where all this stuff is headed. I don't know, you'll have to use your best judgment on how exactly to present that, because it could get really huge, so I don't know. But I'm satisfied here, yeah.
I'm not ready to go present to city council based on what we heard today without doing that deep dive. After we do that deeper dive and see more of the information come together, I think I will be. There are some components that we've been kind of dragging out that we've been talking about. Definitely have more transparency today. First meeting 12 years ago, we had people, in here saying transparency is not important, or not that important. There's been a huge shift, from that point of view, which I think is great. Seeing the whole picture regarding what people have teased out here, I think is key. Because one of I felt like we got a lot of positive feedback, from the city council.
Yeah.
And we spoke, I know Brett was there, we spoke very highly of the staff, and talked about we hit on they have to spend a lot of time answering dumb questions. We didn't say it that way. But we talked about the confidence that we have in the city staff and well beyond just what's, on paper here. And I think we want the position to go back, speak along those.
Well, that's it.
really, I think in general, high level, everything in here does conform in my sense of what the statutes are in the 3A language. Some things that stood out to me, and I think they'll be addressed as we sort of dig deeper or get a little more information. You know, the pavement management element, we spent $3 million on 3 neighborhoods. Aberdeen Village, Arapahoe Hills, Mill Overlay, and those are very particular neighborhoods. They're very high value neighborhoods.
I did notice that, yeah.
And they're low density neighborhoods, so they're contributing to the sales tax fund. Now, I imagine there's reasons that have to do with pavement conditions, whatever, but knowing what the pavement condition plan is for the future would help me to say, well, it wasn't just these rich neighborhoods that used their political insiderness to get 3 million of the 8 spent on their paving. These were not high traffic roads. I mean, I don't know what the prioritization is, but it surprises me that these were the $3 million spent last year. And I would like a really good explanation for that. Maybe the good explanation is we have a 5-year plan and every single neighborhood will get it by 2029. But I don't have that yet inside this.
And we do have exhibits for every year up to 2029 that we could share with you that'll show you where we're focusing on our pavement management program on. And, you know, we have delayed some of the improvements in the northeast part of town because Denver Water eventually will be replacing a lot of the lead service lines to those houses. And so that particular neighborhood, you know, we've waited on.
Understood. But that was something that came up in my head. That page 1, what's striking is that here we have $0 environmental sustainability, and that is in the statutory language. Not that we don't have any environmental sustainability plans, but really I would ask that in our report, something I'm thinking about in the future is that we ask council to bring a member of the environmental stewardship board to this group. Maybe if we want to keep the same number, let Next Gen go, because I don't see any statutory reason for Next Gen on this. It doesn't connect directly, but we have statutory language around sustainability. We have improvement line items on that, and I think a lot of the stuff, when I think about pavement management and street work in general, as Matt said, roads are a liability, a tremendous liability now and in the future. And one of the things I think we want to bring to this is in our stewardship work as a committee is being as smart as we can about how these costs build up in the future. And maybe there are ways when we repave streets, and I would just like more of a voice in that conversation. Maybe when we do these mill overlays and we redo these streets, they are in conjunction with an eye towards lowering the future costs, maintaining those streets. It could be narrowing them. It could be bringing lower traffic modes to the sides that don't get repaved. I don't know, there's a lot of different ideas there, but I think I would say that would be one request I would say to council is for them to reconsider the composition of this board with an eye towards that. And I would hope that we would have some more expenditure in environmental sustainability, whether it's could be any, I can consider things even like creating one really fire safe building.
So just to be clear, just because $0 was allocated at 3A, doesn't mean we spent $0.
Yeah,
on
okay.
sustainability.
It's supposed to be, that is allowed. And
It is allowed, and in 2025, I believe we have that.
$100,000.
Yeah.
And that's for us to complete a climate action plan to be able to start strategizing some initiatives going forward.
It's an accounting question too, of like, if you buy the electric car, could a portion of that for the
Could have been
sustainability?
allocated in that.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, it's allocated 3A anyways, for sure. But like we have the bag fee money, right? So that we've collected for several years now, that we have been putting real heavily for sustainability. So every time you pay 10 cents for a bag at the grocery store, well, that comes to, a portion of it comes to us, and so we have, that's been great. And then we, of course, use general fund to pay directly for a significant amount of sustainability effort. So, yeah, sorry it says $0, that is a bad reflection on our sustainability, but really it speaks to the fact that we're not trying to nickel and dime the 3A fund.
Absolutely, but I think over time, we're gonna see a new line item here, debt service. And these other sections are gonna look, those will be huge, big numbers, millions possibly, those in an annual basis. And when we have 200,000 or 0 in these other things that are in the statutory language, I don't think I'm sure debt service is allowed, but I think when voters approved this, they were thinking of capital projects. And the debt service goes to that, but zero.
Debt service allows it to accelerate.
Yeah. It's a bigger.
It'll be a story that we need to
Payment.
tell when we do that.
Clarify that.
Yeah, the narrative will be important there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's really the time value of money, right? I mean, it's cheaper to borrow the money now than it is to try to cash fund it 20 years later.
And we have some residents that don't buy green bananas anymore because they don't have the time left, right? So they like the idea of that money being spread out over multiple years.
An example of this, I think, is, people are complaining about Littleton Brewery, coming in and the parking situation that has created. And it seems like, we could say, creating other modes of transportation to get there that are not 3,000-pound living room. That could help with environmental sustainability. It could help with, some of these things, not having to end up putting a parking garage, on Littleton Boulevard or Main Street, which is a huge expenditure. So it seems like there's things that we could do to help with that too.
I agree that it's sort of an accounting question. By my rough pencil math, there's maybe $600,000 of expenditures that could have been coded as for sustainability measures, BAS upgrades, HVAC upgrades, things of that nature. Maybe the way to address that is the way you've addressed the FTE allocation in State Streets Littleton, just a footnote. And maybe it's not so much a category, but like, hey, well, if you upgrade a 35-year-old BAS system, you're gonna see massive energy savings. Same thing with irrigation controls, watering on rainy days, all that stuff, I think goes towards that narrative. Maybe a footnote.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Category.
Right, you mentioned the EVs.
Right.
EVs.
Yes.
I think that should be allotted towards environmental sustainability.
I think we bought 4 EVs for traffic. For the traffic or the transportation group, I should say, and I believe those all came out of 3A. That's the 220,000 that you see.
It is fun to say that we're buying cars for sustainability. Electric portion.
It's baby steps, right?
Our air quality needs every help it can get.
Yeah, agreed, yeah.
Jake, did you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, the only caveat, would be, and it's, I hope you guys think this is more common towards council, than engagements from staff, but it helps explain the, some of the overhead, the personnel, the planning, those are seeds that are hopefully gonna germinate and produce crops. But it's hard for us to evaluate that, so I don't feel like I can say that money wasn't spelled right, I can just say, oh, I don't know. Until those things are tied together, it's like, well, we hired X amount of people, until we know what they're doing and they're pointing at, it's hard to say one way or the other. So I think having that backup would close that gap from all. I don't know how, I think in good faith, but I think that's the piece that is missing is we're not supposed to be forward looking, but that kind of.
I guess, do we want, because I know last year, the last 2 years, we had a second meeting where we brought a copy of the memo. We want to do a second meeting where we look at a copy of the memo, which I don't envision is going to be significantly different than we haven't had the past couple of years, but that gave us a good opportunity to maybe just run through some of those high level things.
Yeah, what we can do is, we can send out, we can send anything out, right?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, we can send out some information for everyone to take a look at. We can have the memo drafted, as if everyone is good with it, and then it following the same language, and then we'll review it. And if y'all wanna change the memo, and we can do that. But just for efficiency's sake, if you wanna have it already drafted, saying, hey, it was good, but everyone understands that we're not all good with it until we review that information. And we'll send it out earlier, cause a lot of the information y'all are asking for is already prepared, or I don't think will take much work on our end. I think it's pretty much right in.
Within
Yeah.
30 days, yeah.
We can get that out pretty soon, so there'll be time to review the look and then we'll have that discussion at the next meeting.
I thought we drafted the memo.
We did, yeah. Yeah, I think when you were out talking to Mike, we had talked about that. I think, I'm happy drafting the memo again, and then,
It was just you.
Let's just be honest,
I'm the
you did
control
it.
freak, sorry. I think I can draft the memo here in the next week or so and get it to you. And then if you want to distribute that, so kind of what I'm hearing everybody say is we want to see kind of like maybe the 5-year kind of the CIP plan, whatever you have to kind of give us big picture of that. Maybe some of the.
And we
information.
have that to share, so.
Okay, maybe fleet management.
Pavement management.
I don't know if I wanna share the fleet stuff.
No, well, I guess, yeah, maybe that's more of just a high narrative.
Narrative.
conversation.
Description.
Yeah,
This is what
description.
we'll have.
You can just give us a verbal.
I think it's 59 vehicles that we need to replace that are past their 10-year life.
Okay.
So,
And the safer streets.
I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever projects are in safer streets in the next few years would be good, because that, as Jake mentioned, is a very weak looking category right now. But it's tied to future. Towards future projects, but we don't know what those are.
I don't know if you have the data on it either, but like the maintenance level at year 10 versus 15, for a vehicle, if you have data on that.
We do, it's getting into the weeds here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a little bit.
Yeah, man.
I agree,
Yeah.
yeah, it's true.
Pay for the transportation for it.
I guess for me, if the city council is looking at COPs on some of these bigger projects, like, I think it'd be nice to kind of just have a little bit high level information on the public services campus. And I'm not talking, I'm just saying, hey, here's kind of,
Like we can pull
Yeah.
a description out of the
Yeah.
CIP
Yeah.
and do that.
Yeah.
That's in this- that's just one of the things.
I don't know what's going on with Town Hall Arts Center, you might have to.
It's the same thing, we can pull
Well,
a description for
no,
that.
the gentleman is the art.
Yeah.
Oh, that's you?
Yeah.
Okay. And then what else was what with the downtown?
Downtown
Maybe
project.
revisiting that, just some information on that. Do you want any environmental sustainability stuff? Patrick, would that be helpful?
I don't know if there's anything particular.
Yeah.
Much from 2024, but.
Well, maybe just
I
a,
think we hired Laura.
We did.
well, maybe
And
just a
we also
verbal
hired Aiden
kind of
too.
what,
Yeah.
I think maybe just a verbal of what the
What was
focus
hired
is.
with Yemen?
No. That's why there was $0 spent.
Yeah, I think just having a kind of overview for us, for me, it's hard because, I'm not on a board. And
Yeah, same for
that's
me.
where it's important for like having you guys represent is there's a lot of stuff that you can give us some flavor on, but I think if we have maybe a kind of a higher level picture, because I think too, I fear that you guys only see chunks. Planning sees chunks, Santana, right? But I think, is there anything else that anybody would like to kind of just see?
I think you covered the major ones, CIP, safer streets, and carryovers, future sort of debt or spending and pavement plans.
I think I heard just the narrative on personnel and how they were tied to projects.
Yeah, that'd be kind of helpful too, because I think if we get questions, that'd be helpful. And it can just be, I don't need a study of like all the numbers, just high level.
We're not going to read the capital improvement plan.
It's really exciting, really is.
I like all the stickies.
It's already been revised.
I think that's the only thing I would add is if it makes more sense to some of the stuff to make it a narrative.
Yeah.
Paragraph on the Bellevue Center, timing and rough numbers.
We can pull some
Yeah.
information right out of the council retreat packet, that talks about the project readiness for each of those projects. And then we are going back to council on May 13th for a follow-up about the council retreat, and we will touch on those projects again. And there will be more discussions over the summer.
Yeah, I think that'd be really helpful for that. So when are we supposed to present to council, June?
The second Tuesday in June.
Okay,
Thank you.
so when do we we have anything tentatively booked for the second meeting, or do you guys wanna?
It's on the agenda right now.
Oh, it is
May 30th, or today's the 30th, May 29th.
May 29th?
I was mixing those two up. It's the last days.
Okay.
So, all right, can I run down that list again, just to make sure we're on the same page? I wrote down everything.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing the 5-year the 5-year plan for 3A, which will cover those carryovers we're talking about and will show the major projects. What we can do is we'll share that and then we'll call out some of those big projects in there. So we can see that in a table. Verbal update on just a narrative for the fleet and payment management, just we can share that next time so that there's more information there.
And that doesn't have, it could be a paragraph also, doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Safer streets, another update on that, just sounds like that's also a narrative paragraph showing what the plan is in the future. And then the planned COP projects, which we can pull from some information that we've already shared with council or will share with council. And then environmental, there was discussion on maybe updating this report to call out the environmental sustainability that's already implemented.
No, just kind of estimated.
We could do that. And I wrote down narrative on personnel and their future. That's pretty solid for everyone. Anything I missed?
So just one clarification. Well, we can email you out stuff, if you wouldn't mind just directing your emails to Kevin, right?
Yep.
So if you email the rest of the board, that's an open meetings violation.
Yep.
You can email Kevin and Kevin can email you, no violations.
You're suggesting questions, is that correct?
What's that?
You're just saying we're not engaging with each other, we're just.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
So like, for example, Julie wrote the letter last year and then we shared it back with the board. That's totally okay, above board.
Yeah.
We really do want our community to be engaged and involved and following the rules is one way to build that trust, so.
Well, thank you all so much. I loved all the questions, loved the pushback. I love seeing, I think I get really excited about all the involvement and everybody's engaged and how exciting. And so we'll prepare the stuff we send out, we'll send out, and I'll send an update of what we plan to just share. And I have a copy of last year's memo if everyone wants to look at it, or I'll just email it out to everyone. That's good. And that way you can take a look at it if there's anything in there. Remember, if you have any comments, address them to me, and then I will share them. Was anything, anyone has anything?
Our new finance director begins May 27th, so.
Oh, maybe she'll come to the meeting.
Appearance.
2 days.
I just want to say thank you guys to just the information that you guys provided, and just the refresher. It's nice to have all of you guys here as staff. For those of us who see you guys twice a year, it's nice to just put faces and understand kind of what's happened big picture. So I appreciate the time you guys are spending on that. And then, of course, all the behind the scenes with all the projects. I know it's not easy and we're always a demanding group of citizens.
That's great.
But I just want to say thank you to all you guys. So I appreciate it.
Well,
All right, so we'll see everybody on the 29th then.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Have a great day.